Okay, very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I'm Kevin Xiao from the School of Electrical and Electronic Engineering, NTU. It is my great pleasure and a great honor to introduce to you our next speaker, Prof. Kristian Lindgren. I try to get his name correctly. All right, Prof. Lindgren is a professor in complex system from Chalmers University of Technology. He has been working on complex science for decades. His research ranges from theory to model to various applications. So using and in many cases, enriching the knowledge from different areas, including information theory, evolutionary modeling, and game theory, and many more. So today he'll be talking about the land use. Earlier I asked him, how should I introduce your talk? What's your talk? How should I tell the audience about the scope of your talk? He said, don't worry, I will explain to them. So without any further delay, I will pass the stage to our next speaker. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome our next speaker, Prof. Lindgren. Thank you.
Thank you. So, can everybody hear me? Okay, fine. First, I'd like to thank John for this kind invitation, and actually also for providing with me with the title. It was first actually Energy, Economy and Complexity. And I choose to switch from energy to land use because that is the topic where we are focusing right now. But I would also like to start with confessing, like Peter Sloot did, that I'm one of the belonging sort of to the global world modelers, in a sense, taking a very crude look at the whole, but using fairly simple and rough models, making what-if scenarios for the future. But I try to be careful about what conclusions can be drawn from such crude looks on the whole world in the future. And in the talk today, I will try to problematize this type of what-if scenarios, which are usually based on various types of modeling approaches, problematize that by looking at the other end of the scale where I have been engaged, which is in the complexity area, on the micro level, so to say, where game theory, agent-based modeling, and sort of microeconomics assumptions are playing a more important role. So what I will try to do today is to first give sort of a policy background, starting with energy and climate and looking towards the area of land use, and to show via a sequence of models how the typical modeling approaches in land use can be problematic. And I've chosen to go through a number of sort of simple economic models at different levels of description to illustrate how, when you go down to more microscopic descriptions of the system, how new features may appear. So this is, I must also say that this is ongoing research in our group. So I'm doing this together with a group of 4 PhD students. And I'm very glad that I got the opportunity to present this work that sort of excites us the most right now. But the energy background is the following. The past 100 years, we have witnessed a more than 10-fold increase in supply of primary energy, and that has primarily been fossil fuel energy use. And the effect of that has been an increase of atmospheric carbon dioxide from below 300 ppm to passing 400 ppm within 1 or 2 years, I would expect. For the future, if we want to meet the reduction requirements, if we want to avoid risks of having an increase of global mean temperature that stays below +2 degrees from the pre-industrial levels, we would have to have a decline of use of at least of net emissions of carbon dioxide. So the use of coal, oil and gas should go something in that direction. But at the same time, we have economic growth that will continue to ask for more of the energy services that the primary energy supply can support. A part of this increase in energy supply can, of course, be reduced because energy efficiency and possibly lifestyle changes. But there will certainly remain a gap that needs to be filled by new technologies that will have their different pros and cons. In this presentation, I will focus on one of the possible candidates for filling up a part of this gap, which is bioenergy, where the main problem is that an increased use of bioenergy will start to compete with other forms of land use. In many of I've been involved in energy scenarios of this type, and I think that sort of a rough picture like the one we see might be a useful sort of starting point for a discussion. The problem is, I think, when you start to make these pictures more detailed, because then you might get the false impression that you are more certain about what you say about the future. So a rough picture could give you some sort of a framework as a basis for discussion. But in many of the scenarios that are made using various types of modeling approaches, they suggest that the bioenergy supply in the future might increase from in the order of 40 to 50 exajoules that we have today. The present primary energy supply is around 500 exajoules. So about 10% of the primary supply comes from bioenergy, but most of it is from traditional use of biofuels, and only less than 10 exajoules is from commercial biofuel use. And in many scenarios, in the order of 100 to 300 exajoules are suggested. About 100 exajoules of those can be considered to be coming from residue flows from forestry and agriculture. But usually a large part is assumed to be to come from use of crops from agricultural land. And if 100 exajoules is to take part in this future figure, that would require about 500 million hectares of land. So, of course, the critical question is, where should that land be placed? And this problem, this issue, has been sort of accentuated the last 5 years, since we have seen, if we look at the price dynamics on markets for different agricultural commodities, we have seen high fluctuations and at least two price peaks during the past 5 years. And some of the causes suggested that might be behind part of this increase in food prices has been suggested to come from increased competition on land between production of crops for food purposes and for bioenergy. Now, these types of fluctuations in agricultural commodity markets, that is not new. It was also discussed quite a lot 100 years ago in the 1910s and 20s. And for example, Ludwell Moore, in his book about forecasting the yield and the price of cotton, he starts that chapter with this quotation that I'd like to read. An eminent economist has recently told us that economists no longer talk so confidently as they once did of forecasting and social phenomena, and that confronted with the complexity of social relations, the sober-minded investigator will be slow in laying too much stress on single causes, slow in generalization, and slowest of all in prediction. I think that, in a sense, supports a crude look at the whole perspective. And it's almost 100 years old. I will, in my presentation, take a step away from a crude look, because I would like to present for you a series of models where I go from a very aggregate description down through a number of levels, down to more of a microscopic description. But before doing so, let me say a few words about the different causes that have been discussed connected to the food price spikes that we have seen the past 5 years. One cause that has been mentioned that have happened several times is because of weather. Both droughts and large rainfalls has led to decreased supply of food crops to the markets. Another cause that has been suggested is speculation on future markets. There has been a sort of an inflow of money trading contracts or futures in food markets, which some researchers claim has led to some of the price spikes. There is also an increased demand from various growing economies, including also diet changes, and especially China has been mentioned as one country that has increased its import of food. And also national policies on import and export. For example, India in 2007, they put a ban on export of various types of rice, which really led to a decrease of rice traded in the international market, and that probably was a major cause to one of the price spikes. But the final point is what I would like to discuss more today, deals with land competition due to increased bioenergy demand. And the reason why I'd like to go into this question a little bit more in detail is that a colleague of mine, he made a sort of a systematic review in the literature of what kind of modeling approaches have been tried to make a quantitative assessment of how an increased demand of bioenergy affect food prices. And what he found was the following, that out of 126 papers that has been published since year 2000, 117 of them were based on modeling of using equilibrium economic modeling approaches. 9 were statistical. So none of the models explicitly talk about dynamical features. And if we remember the volatile character of the price curves for agricultural commodities, and also bearing in mind that these studies actually were talking about responses within a 10-year period, one can be questioning what kind of answers can these types of model really answer. So that is sort of the background for our work, where we are going to try to where we have learned some economics from constructing a series of models, and starting with actually 2 types of equilibrium models, but then going to dynamic models and also to agent-based models. And in order to be able to compare the models across these levels of hierarchies, I will base the models on the same sort of microscopic foundation. So these are the 4 or possibly 5 levels that we are considering. There are 2 types of equilibrium models that I will describe. The top one is what is usually used when you do partial equilibrium modeling. That is when you focus on in this case, the agricultural sector. You don't look at the effect in other sectors in society. I will briefly discuss how that can be transformed into a land rent equilibrium problem. But then we will go down to, leave the equilibrium description and talk about price and quantity dynamics, which is an old topic in economics, connecting back to Ludwell Moore's work, actually. And to finally reach agent decisions based on profit maximization, which will illustrate new features that may appear when you really model things on the agent level. The very bottom part connects to my earlier research in game theory that is strongly inspired by Axelrod's work in the 80s, and also by Brian Arthur's ideas of avoiding equilibrium models. I will not have time to talk about that, but it's still an area that interests me quite a lot. So I will describe those 4 levels of models in this hierarchy, and I will start with describing the microeconomic basis that we are using. So in the very bottom, we assume that there is an agent that holds a parcel of land. So the 5 gigahectares of agricultural land is assumed to be ordered in a way from the best quality to the left to the worst quality to the right. So this is a relative quality measure from 1 to 0. That relative quality measure is multiplied with the crop-specific yield constant, which will give a certain harvest at a certain A, which is at some land parcel along this line, and for the specific crop I. So each agent is sitting somewhere along this line, receiving this harvest. An agent is also then has a cost for producing the harvest if the agent chooses the crop I. And given that cost, the agent can also see or find a profit function, given that there is a certain price that the agent considers to be paid when the crop is harvested and sold on the market. So it's the income minus the cost, of course. The agents are profit maximizing, so we are really assuming what you usually do when you look at sort of an ideal situation. The agent chooses the crop that maximizes the profit. And the total production of a certain crop I, that is QI, we get from integrating over all land qualities and the different harvest yields. And here we just select out the optimal crop at the different positions along this quality line, so to say. And then finally, the crucial point is that the produced quantity determines the price. I mean, this is a critical point. We assume that price, when the crops are harvested, they are put on the market, and that will set the price according to a demand function. And we typically use an isoelastic demand function. And this is certainly a problem because, or maybe not a problem, but it's critical because this price was not known to the agent when the agent decided which crop to sow. And so there is this delay between the decision what to sow and when the price is revealed. This is not a problem in equilibrium models because equilibrium models assume this P to be the same. And the equilibrium models just finds this situation, and that's what they do, so to say. And I will, in a few minutes, show how it works. But when we move down to lower levels in this hierarchy, we will see that this delay in information plays a crucial role. So now I will describe this. I mean, this is sort of elementary for many of you, but I'd like to go through these steps anyway. And also this approach of maximization of consumer and producer surplus is the standard approach in many of, or in all partial equilibrium models that are used to do these assessments of price responses to increased bioenergy demand. And the idea is simply the following one, that we have the demand curve I showed before, and we have a supply or a cost function, which we construct from the individual agents. We build this up. So the supply function is the marginal cost of production as a function of quantity. And if there is a certain aggregate quantity Q produced, that will lead to a certain price. And the consumer surplus is simply the value that is represented by this area. This is sort of an economic value that all those consumers that buy the commodity that they experience. And similarly, the area below the price line constitute then the producer surplus or the profit that the producers will gain. The idea with surplus maximization is to maximize this area. I mean, that sounds reasonable. We will then sort of maximize the total area and everybody would be happy. So this looks fine. For a single commodity situation, this is quite simple. But if we go to two commodities, like if we consider two crops, and let's assume that crop 1 is placed on higher quality land and crop 2 is pushed to land of lower quality, then it means that the cost function or the supply function of the second crop will depend on how much we produce of the first crop. So an equilibrium in this situation may look like this. The maximum total area may actually then lead to that we will not reach this crossing line because land is a limited factor of production. So this enters as a scarcity price for land. And in fact, the distance between the supply curve and the price level constitute the land rent, the profit that the farmer can get, now assuming that the farmer owns the land, would correspond to the land rent in this situation. And this brings us over to the other formulation of the maximization problem, which is a land rent equilibrium situation, where the main point is that the land rent of the best quality land that produces the second crop need to be the same as the land rent for the worst land that produce the first crop. If there would be a difference there, farmers would switch to one or the other crop. So it means that we can put these two figures into one graph where we replace quantity in the horizontal axis with land area instead. And I still keep the price on the vertical axis. So we see that up to point A1, the best quality land, we will produce crop 1, and after that, crop 2 will be produced until this point. And at this point, the value of land will be 0. And the land rent equilibrium problem is then such that we get the continuity in land rent between the first crop at the very right side and the second crop at the very left side. So we get a graph like this one. So those land rent curves, or the profits that the farmer would gain from producing crop 1 and crop 2, those curves, for crop 1 it would continue down like this, and for crop 2 would go up like that, just indicating that in the interval 0 to A1, the crop 1 will be the most profitable one, and in area A1 to A2, crop 2 will be the most profitable one. So this is just an illustration of the equilibration process that finds such an equilibrium. In this case, in a situation where we consider 3 generic crops. To the very left, we have intensively produced crops, IP. In the middle, we have bioenergy crops. And to the right, we have extensively produced crops, which could be pasture land or fodder for animals. And what we see to the right here is the lines are the price levels. We have different scales here. That's why we don't have equality in the profits. Profit made there. The production of bioenergy is larger, which will make a continuity in land rent curves still to hold. So this would correspond to a situation where we have only 2 crops and bioenergy is not present. If we add bioenergy, that will be typically be placed in between, depending on what type of bioenergy crop we are considering. But the immediate, very visible result is that we will get a much higher land rent resulting from this. Now, this is sort of depicting a very large introduction of bioenergy in the order of 100 exajoules that I discussed, that is used in many scenarios. So next, I'd like to move away from those equilibrium models. I mean, in those equilibrium models, we're not asking the question about the stability of the equilibrium. I mean, the equilibrium is assumed to hold. And what I would like to do is to think about, in a very simple way, and this was done some 80 years ago, actually, think about the stability of an equilibrium in this type of picture. So assuming that at some point in time, a certain quantity QT is produced, which will set the market price, P of T. So this is a very simplistic view, assuming now that that will lead to agents choosing to produce this amount of the crop in total. And that would then lead to a new price level, and that would lead to a new quantity being produced, and so on. So we get into this type of situation, sort of indicating that in a sequence of iterations, we would actually hit the equilibrium point suggested by equilibrium economic models. But it's also clear that whether we will hit this point or not depends on the relative slopes of the curves at the fixed point. So if we slightly tilt, for example, the supply curve, and do the same exercise again, we'll get this picture. We have a diverging trajectory of prices and quantities. And because of the picture we get here, this was termed the cobweb theory in the 1930s. It followed from Ludwell Moore's and many other researchers' investigation of price and quantity dynamics in the agricultural markets. Ezekiel was one researcher involved in this, talking here about the apparent inconsistency between persistence of these observed cycles and the tendency towards an equilibrium posited by economic theory. Tinbergen drew those diagrams in his paper from 1930, for example. And Ritchie, Schultz, and Calder were other economists involved in this work. And what the cobweb theory really dealt with was the analysis of the stability of this point. So, and the stability comes from the ratio of the slopes. And if the absolute value of the ratio of those slopes is larger than 1, then this fixed point is unstable. And this type of model class was to quite a large extent, further developed and explored in a series of papers in the 90s by Holmes, Brox, and Arifovich, who investigated chaotic behavior and periodic cycles, and also various types of various types of learning mechanisms that could affect the stability of the dynamics. So I will show a few examples, or one example at least, of this dynamic later on. But before doing that, I'd like to go down to the fourth level, to the agent-based level, where agent decisions are based on profit maximization. So the agent-based model is the following one. We have n agents that are distributed over land, and we will now, for simplicity in a sense, consider an infinite number of agents. It will make the description of the modeling a little bit simpler. We consider two types of agents, actually. So an agent is characterized both by what kind of method the agent uses in order to determine how the agent finds or guesses the price at harvest. So that is the E part. The I part is the crop that the agent is currently growing. And each agent is sitting then at a certain parcel of land at position A. So that determines a certain quality that the agent has on his or her land. So at each A, we have an infinite number of agents in this simple model. There is a mix of which crop they grow, and there is also two different ways in which they guess or estimate the price at harvest time. We assume that there are discrete time steps, so one time step is a complete season, and we also sort of make this nice for the system if you want the system to find an equilibrium, that we only allow a certain fraction gamma of the agents to reconsider their choice of crop. Having gamma being very low means that we slowly will change the crop types and the system may then reach an equilibrium. We will see that this parameter may be critical. The two types of agents that we consider are naive agents or zero-intelligent agents. They will guess that the price at harvest time will be the same as the price is now. The other agent type is rational agents, and we are again now nice to equilibrium models by assuming that the rational agents actually know exactly what the price will be at harvest. So they know actually two things. They know how many agents that are zero-intelligent. They know what the zero-intelligent agents will do. So they perfectly know what the price will be, because they also know that all the other rational agents will do the same as they do. So the rational agents are, in a sense, both in a good and in a bad position. I mean, they are in a good position that they exactly know what to do, but they have no choice also. I mean, the zero-intelligent agents, they act just as they want to do without thinking about what happens. The rational agents, they will have to act in a way which will, well, it will actually bring them to a temporary equilibrium, but they are not sort of very rational because they are not looking forward in time in more than one time step. So if all agents would be rational, that would directly bring the system to the equilibrium point. But when there is a mix of naive and rational agents, that may not happen. And now in this first setting, I'm assuming that the distribution between naive and rational agents is fixed. I mean, there is a certain fraction all over land of one of the agents, and the rest is the other agent. So there is no dynamics between the agents, or for agents to switch between naive and rational type. The only dynamics that is entering here is the choice of the crop. And this can be sort of summarized in these equations. The zero-intelligent agents occupying crop I at the next time step will be, well, there is 1 minus gamma, those who don't change, and then a fraction gamma change to the optimal crop. The optimal crop is given by I star. And the optimal crop is then determined by, or depends on, the land quality A and the price that they see. The naive agents, they assume the price to be what the price is now. The similar equation for the rational agents would look like this, where the agents switch to the optimal crop I star, given the future price, pt plus 1, that is assumed to be known then for the rational agents. So this is now an illustration of the dynamics. Here we see the land quality going from high to low quality. Here we have the extensively produced crops. The green is the intensively produced crops, and the red is the bioenergy crops. What we see here is a situation where 30% of the agents are are the rational ones. And we see that even though these can know what is optimal for them to do, that is not a sufficient number in order to stabilize the system. It should be noted that after the season, what the zero-intelligent agents are doing is that they mimic the actions of the rational agents. So there is a delay in what the naive agents are doing, but that sort of delay is enough in order to destabilize or to keep the system out of equilibrium. But we can see what happens if we ramp up the fraction of rational agents. So now it's 38%. We see some kind of stabilization. Okay, so these are the price levels for intensively produced crops, bioenergy crops, and extensively produced crops. And now when we pass 50% of the agents being rational, the system looks more or less stable. And please interrupt if you would like to ask a question also. So at this point, I'd like to actually go back to the price and quantity dynamics that the cobweb theory suggests. And I'd like to do that by making a projection, because on the agent-based level, we have equations that describe how the composition of the crops change from one season to the next. And I mean, this is often a general question when you work on models or a hierarchy of models, whether you can make a projection or a coarse graining where you get a closed equation on the next level. And in this case, you can actually make a projection that brings you to a closed dynamics on the level of quantities. And it's done in the following way. Here we have the two equations that determine how the crops are distributed locally. And what we do now is that we just integrate these equations over space, multiply with the crop-specific factors, which will, if I leave out some of the details, which will leave us with an equation that only contains quantities. We don't need the details of the distribution on the bottom level when we do this type of projection. And this is an advantage, because it means that we can actually talk about stability properties of this system by doing this projection. Here we can identify, I mean, this is a three-dimensional iterated map. So we can, by using the analysis of the Jacobian, we can find whether this is stable or not. And we can easily simulate a very large number of time series using this equation, much faster than we can do on this level. And as an illustration, I'd like to show a number of runs then where we, on the horizontal axis here, have the fraction of rational agents, and on the vertical axis we have the realized price levels for bioenergy. So we see what we saw at the very end, that if the fraction of rational agents is large enough, the system stabilizes at a certain level. But when we go down to smaller fractions of rational agents, we see a period doubling sequence, and this clearly shows that the system is chaotic when the number of rational agents is too small. So then I would like to finally talk a little bit about what we are currently working on, which is adaptive agents. So then we go back again to the level of agent-based modeling, and we relax the constraint that at each land plot there is a fixed fraction between the rational and the zero-intelligent agents. And we assume that we assume that there is some cost CR for an agent to use the rational expectation mechanism. And after each season, a fraction of agents may reconsider what type of mechanism they should use in order to make the guess for the price after harvest time. And they do this change depending on, they compare with other agents and see how successful they have been among agents that have the same land quality as themselves. This means that you may have different fractions of rational agents in different parts of the land diagram, so to say. It might be so that at some, if the land quality is very high or very low, you might do very well without having a very advanced mechanism, while at certain points you may want to have a stronger mechanism or a better mechanism for finding out what is the price after harvest. So here we see the same type of simulation as we saw before. In the bottom left, what we see here is how the rational agents are distributed over land. And what we can note here is that rational agents are mostly present in the area where bioenergy is grown. And bioenergy is the crop in this situation that sort of causes the instability. But we also see that there is instability in this dynamics. And the question is, why is that? And I mean, why doesn't the system end up in a stable situation where all agents locally around this critical point where we have a lot of bioenergy, why don't they dominate there? Okay, so in this situation, what they do is that they look at agents at the same land quality, and the agents they collect profit by they take the profit from the current harvest, and they do that by adding that to a moving average. So it's a moving average of historic profits that are used with a weight factor that is 1/2.
So are some agents still not adapting? Are some agents each of the other two types that started before?
Yeah, it's those two types of agents still, and they are all allowed to adapt. Well, in every time step, 20% of them change prediction method if there is one prediction method that is better than the other one at that point in time. So my question is to you: why doesn't the system stabilize? I think that, yes.
Two types of agents, a sophisticated agent and naive. Now, the sophisticated agent adapts in a particular way. And you've got a naive agent who is going to obviously not adapt in that particular way. Or do they have the same adaptive mechanism?
Yeah, they can. I mean, also the zero-intelligent agent can switch to be rational, but there is a small cost to be paid for being rational.
And is that determined endogenously, or do you specify as?
Okay. This cost is specified, and I should say that it's very low in this situation. So I keep the cost very small, actually. And let me, I'm trying to have you to think about what might cause this destabilization.
Too many switch.
Sorry?
Too many switch.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, what happens is that we get very close to the equilibrium situation. And then you don't have to pay the cost for being rational. Then you can actually be a zero intelligent agent. So what we see is that at those points, we get more and more free riders. They don't need to pay the cost because we are sitting in the equilibrium, so then we can forget about how we came there. So then my question is, what could be a simple mechanism to stabilize the system?
So what you're saying is that as you get close to equilibrium, there are more and more free riders.
Yes.
And that, in some sense, less information is being aggregated as you get closer to equilibrium. And that when that happens, then you go back into sort of instability, and then again people start adapting. Then
Yes.
you get back again to equilibrium, less information gets aggregated, and then that cycle continues,
Yes.
and then we don't see stability.
Yes, that's right, exactly. So my next question to you is then, could we stabilize this system in a simple way?
So we now have an information aggregation problem. So we have somebody providing that information, because it has to be externally provided, because the way you're modeling the agents, that there is no internal mechanism which will aggregate that information.
No, that's right. I mean, either we would have to introduce another agent, or we could we possibly modify how we model the system in a way. Let me show two simulations here. The top one is the one I showed before. The bottom one is slightly modified. And only slightly, I would say. Actually, it's modified in a way to be more, in a sense, more realistic. So my question is, what have I done? That insurance is that's a good point. Actually, we haven't done that, but that is part of our next step. That would also help, but that is not what I did. Yes? Yeah, exactly. So there is noise added. Very small level of noise, 0.3%, added independently to the 3 different crops. And that noise keeps the system slightly off equilibrium and makes it possible for the rational agents to stay in the system.
Hello. There's a paper by Stiglitz and Sandy Grossman and Stiglitz on the impossibility of informationally efficient market. It's Journal of Political Economy, 1983, which basically handles this in the stock market environment.
Yes.
And shows that this noise can actually make it, give some extra profit to this and have this informed or rational agent, the way you're saying, basically be a part in equilibrium. And it is this, this free riding versus this totally revealing prices versus, totally noisy prices. It has to be in between.
Yes.
It cannot be totally noisy prices, or it cannot be totally efficient prices, basically.
Yes.
It's a JP paper in 1983.
Yeah, okay, very good. Yes, if you would increase the noise much more, then the system would be very unstable. And if you would decrease the noise, you wouldn't be helped by the noise. You could also make other types of modifications. Here we have introduced a third agent, which is a trend-following agent. It actually also, and now it's without noise, actually. And the trend-following agent works sort of in concert with the rational agents, and it leads to some degree of stabilization. But remember that in all of those cases where we, in a sense, get pretty close to an equilibrium situation, we still had to assume that we have these ideally rational agents that have a tremendous amount of information about the future prices. And in our current work, we are now exploring a more open set of possible agents, but that would not include these sort of very rational agents that have a tremendous amount of information about the future price. And by that, I think we can move on to sort of a summary of what we have done. I mean, one of the key points with this presentation was to show for you this hierarchy of 4 different model types that are all based on the same or similar microeconomic situation. But it's clear that we do get new behavior appearing on the third and the fourth, the bottom level. One key finding, I think, is that we have this ideal projection from agent-based dynamics to quantity or cobweb dynamics, which provides us with a tool for analyzing an agent-based model when such a projection can be done. And then we introduced sort of adaptive or evolutionary behavior, which then will not allow us to make this type of projection any longer, and the analysis of this type of system then requires that we are doing or performing the analysis on the level of the adaptive agents. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kristian. A very fascinating talk. Quite a few questions have been asked during the talk, but we still have enough time to, Brian? Oh, I have to keep my one.
Thank you, Brian Arthur. One obvious thing to do is to match the price and output data with real statistics over time. There's many crops in many parts of the world have been measured. There's lots of data, there's price data, land use data, and so on. And the second statistical thing that can be done is to look at how farmers do make their decisions statistically from one year to the next. So my question is, have you thought of matching this qualitative behavior and the agent-based learning with actual real market data?
Yeah, we have thought about that, and I know that there is a fairly recent paper dealing with time series of food commodity and comparing sort of statistical features of the price series with what you find in reality. And that was a model where they specifically actually looked at storing crops in between seasons. And we intend to extend our model also to that type of mechanism, and also to explore whether we could sort of capture some of the statistical features of real-time series. And when it comes to decisions on the level of agents, we haven't thought about how to do that, but it's certainly of interest to us to go in that direction. The Global Land Project came out with a report less than 2 weeks ago where they call for development of models for making assessments of land use, where you include the decision making on the level of the farmer in those models. But let me also then go back to the reason for doing this exercise, and that is that, I mean, all, as you saw in this systematic review overview, all of the models that have been used in making assessments are equilibrium models, and there are not really yet any good models that are based on agents' decisions that make assessments on the global level. There are lots of models where you model local situations, farms, and so on, where you do agent-based modeling, but not where you aggregate those to the global level. And so on the global level, we have a dominance of equilibrium modeling, which is sort of strange, I would say.
Peter Schwartz, question. In Singapore, obviously the question of land use is a very critical issue. Agriculture is not the competitive force here. It's people's choices about how they choose to live and so on. Do you think the models that you're talking about here would apply to those situations where some people view their home as simply a home, other as an economic activity where the price increase matters, leads to selling behavior, and which then may put pressure on others to sell and so on? So are there dynamics that would be similar, that would allow similar kind of predictive models to be developed for real estate forecasting and decisions about land use planning for Singapore?
I can very well think that, I mean, this delay between when you take a decision and well, whether it's a decision to build a house or to make an investment, and I mean, you don't know the future price. So, I mean, a delay between the price you know when you take your decision and when you want to sell something is, I know that has been investigated also for real estate markets. But I don't know any details of those models, though, I must say. But I would expect that, not exactly this type of model, but models with the same idea should be applicable to that type of problem, I think.
I assume to go into the dynamic models is because you're interested in this peaks and spikes and so forth, and to learn ways to reduce that. It just seems, two comments relative to that. It just seems to me unrealistic to have any perfectly future-aware agents. So
Yes.
it seems that's a simplification that has to be eliminated if you're going to get to practical. Okay.
Absolutely.
Second question is, in many cases, at least that I'm aware of, there's also subsidies acting, which may well reduce uncertainty in parts of these, particularly in the energy side. And have you any intention of going in the direction of putting subsidies in and reducing those unreal agents?
Yeah, when it. Yeah, let me just think for a few seconds. I mean, first I agree that, I mean, these agents are unrealistically well informed, and so that is just a starting point actually to make these models, in a sense, being kind to those who do equilibrium modeling. So those we are going to get rid of those agents, and rather we would like to have some kind of adaptive or evolutionary mechanism that selects for what type of agents should be in the population, so to say. When it comes to subsidies, we haven't thought about that explicitly. We have thought about introducing various types of mechanisms that could possibly lead to stabilization. But the primary goal with this investigation was to point at a number of mechanisms within this class of economic models that leads to destabilization. Then we know that there are a variety of different mechanisms that could be added that could lead to stabilization. But that could also lead to the system locking in to equilibria, different types of equilibria. So the system could very easily be more dependent on the history, I would say. So we haven't explicitly thought about subsidies in this respect.
Greg Fisher from the think tank Synthesis. If the prices that you're looking at are traded in the financial markets, and I'm guessing that you are looking at those, I'm wondering the extent to which you're looking at how prices are formed in financial markets. Because I worked at the Bank of England for 9 years and in a hedge fund for 3 years, so I've got a lot of experience actually sitting on dealing desks. And David Tuckett's work at UCL, he wrote a book, Minding the Markets, talks about narrative formation, narrative emergence and perpetuation, explains brilliantly well, I think, how it really works in the financial markets. I'd recommend anyone read that book, it's excellent. I'm wondering if you have captured that at all, would want to capture that, because some of those narratives can be completely detached from the fundamentals you're talking about.
Yeah.
Not always, but they often get detached, and price formation can kind of go all over the place,
Yeah.
which has got nothing to do with fundamentals.
So I don't know if I got the question.
I'm really just making a statement.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the price formation here, it's extremely simplified, of course, since we are assuming that there is a demand function that determines the price. That is a high simplification. A kind of parameter that we have to modify that is that we assume that not all of what is produced after a season is left out to the market, but it's put in the storage, and then a fraction of the storage is put out on the market. So there is a parameter that you can use in order to sort of dampen the effect of large and small produced quantities. So that is sort of a simple way that we have introduced to sort of modify to modify the demand function, I would say. But I will look at the reference you mentioned.
Can I just add? The model you have has no financial factors in there. You're looking at a sort of a real supply and demand model with no financial factors at all. So, for example, the question asked on real estate markets, I mean, historically, you're going to get real estate booms when there's a huge increase in credit, because typically a real estate purchase is a highly leveraged purchase. You're putting down a 10 or 20% down payment, then you're borrowing. If borrowing is easy, borrowing is at low cost, and that's what we've found during the current run-up in prices, not just in the US, but also in Europe. And the point that's being made there was exactly that once you get the dynamic going with cheap credit, and there's an expectation that you can borrow and flip and make a profit, then it has a dynamic of its own, nothing to do with fundamentals. So in the model that you have, there is no role being played by credit and leverage.
That's not introduced at this point.
At this point, yeah. So that's a different set of models that we look at when we are trying to gauge the build-up of real estate prices. And in fact, if you draw a graph, I work for the IMF and we've done it. If you draw a graph of, say, the European countries where, Spain, UK, France, Germany, Ireland, you can see that the run-up in credit correlates very, very nicely with the run-up in prices in those countries. Okay? So if leverage is not available, you're not going to be able to run up the real estate prices.
Yeah.
So financial factors play a fundamental role, and historically have.
Yes, and those are factors that we plan to introduce in this model. I mean, the work that we have done is to a large extent inspired by the work, the Santa Fe artificial stock market model. And but at this point, we have kept the model very, very simple. But to introduce that type of mechanisms also in this model is important, I think.
Is that on? So maybe this also hasn't been considered, and maybe it's not worthy of consideration, but 500 million hectares of land is an awful lot of land. And I'm just curious about the angle of water and where that water would come from and how that's factored in.
So I'm not working in that area. I mean, I'm just sort of referring to that as a scenario that is often suggested. And what we want to do here is to illustrate what that would mean in terms of land competition. But water is an extremely important issue in that in that context. But it's not part of our research.
If you go back to your original motivation about preventing climate change, doesn't biomass create problems in the way that fossil fuels do, and therefore they aren't really a contributor to solving the problem that needs to be done?
Well, no, I don't agree with that. I mean, there are lots of ways you can have a biomass production which will have a net zero or close to net zero effect on the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Anna? Yeah, over there.
Wait. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Since we are talking about the land resource here, I'm wondering whether you adopt any special geometric distribution for the land resource here in your model, or you just put those land into your model.
Could you please repeat a little bit louder?
Oh, sorry. I have one question. Do you use any special geometric distribution for those land resource in your model?
For the land resource or the land quality?
The land resource.
Okay,
you mean in your model you just put those land into your model, or you follow some special geometric distribution?
That was based on. Let's see if I can go back. Probably not. That was based on land quality data that EASA provides that roughly describes relative land qualities ranging from one down to 0. It's a pretty rough representation, but it's based on sort of a very aggregate model that is suggested by EASA.
Thank you.
What she means is is there spatial correlation for type quality of land?
Okay. So there is no geography in this model. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Any other question, please? Over there.
My question relates to the question on whether this model could be tweaked for land useful in real estate. In the case of real estate, roof over one's head is a very strong emotive issue. Evoke very strong emotions. So therefore, a government, if it wants to get elected, would respond to that in a very definite way. For instance, in Singapore, to address concerns, the government has intervened 7 successive times. In your model, is there a place to account for such governmental interventions, or is it beyond modeling? Thank you.
I think it's beyond this model. I mean, the purpose with this sequence of models was to show what kind of that various types of dynamic features appears when we leave the equilibrium modeling area. And I mean, this is a highly conceptual, very simple model, and we do intend to include a variety of different mechanisms to make it possibly more realistic. But to me, it's hard to say whether it can be transformed into something that is useful in that sense. I mean, we consider this as a conceptual model that is useful as a demonstration of the problems that we have with equilibrium models that are being used to make assessments.
Thank you. We have one last question before we have to close this session. Then, of course, we can have a discussion, afterwards. Over there. No? I have a question? Over there, in the back.
Just a clarification on the question that was asked about the rational expectation agents. We really don't need, I think, you don't need fully rational agents. What you need is a better informed agent. So if you have a naive agents, and if you have a set of agents who are getting a noisy signal, I think you can get all the results that you are getting. The noisy signals, the precision of the noisy signal has to be, better than zero, basically. Basically, they have to be better informed, but not necessarily rational expectation. Obviously, you see these pronounced cycles if you have, the difference between the naive and the rationals are very high, and there is a cost to becoming rational. But you really, the sufficient condition is that they are better informed rather than rational expectation. That's what Stiglitz and Grossman had in that paper. So you might want to. Thank you.
Okay.
I think we have to stop here. Thanks now to our speaker for the very interesting talk. Allow me to present this small token of appreciation to our speaker.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.